On a freezing winter afternoon in New York City, the wind whipped through the towering skyscrapers, sending a biting chill through the streets. Amid the chaos of honking taxis and bustling pedestrians, a single mother sat on a patch of sidewalk. Near 42nd Street, her arms wrapped tightly around her two daughters. Emily Adams, once full of promise and ambition, now looked a shadow of the woman she used to be. Her once glossy auburn hair was now matted beneath a wool hat, her eyes sunken from sleepless nights and empty stomachs. Next to her, Lily, age 8, and Ava, just 5, huddled against her sides for warmth, their small frames shivering under threadbare jackets. Emily whispered softly to them, trying to distract them with made-up stories as they waited for someone, anyone, to spare them a glance or a coin. Most people passed by without a second look, eyes forward, too preoccupied to see the quiet desperation sitting in plain sight. But one man did stop. James Bennett had built a name for himself in the city's competitive real estate market, a man known for his sharp instincts and even sharper suits. Loyal, reserved, and rarely distracted, James prided himself on discipline and self-control. But today, something in his routine broke. As he stepped out of his sleek black sedan, his gaze fell on the hunched figure of a woman protecting 2 children from the cold. There was something familiar in the shape of her shoulders, something that made his heart jolt. He slowed his pace, eyes narrowing, unsure of what drew him in. But when Emily looked up, their eyes met, and in that single fleeting moment, recognition flashed between them. The years had changed them both. But the pain etched into her face stirred something in James he couldn't ignore. James Bennett's breath caught in his throat as he stood frozen in place, staring at the woman huddled on the sidewalk. Crowd flowed around him, but for a moment, it all faded into a muffled blur. He wasn't sure what pulled him in first, the worn features of the woman, the way she clutched her children to her chest, or the haunted look in her eyes. But then she looked up again, just for a second, and recognition slammed into him like a wave. Emily Adams. His memory flickered back to another lifetime high school days in upstate New York. The girl who'd always sat 2 rows ahead in English class, the one he'd never had the courage to speak to. She had been bright, kind, and full of quiet strength. But the woman in front of him now was worn down by time and hardship, a faded version of the girl he remembered. Her face was pale, her lips chapped from the cold, and her coat barely thick. Enough for autumn was wrapped tightly around her thin frame. James hesitated. His instinct screamed at him to move, to continue walking and pretend he hadn't seen anything. After all, what could he really do? He wasn't someone who gave to panhandlers or stopped for strangers on the street. His world was one of structured schedules, calculated risks, and clean-cut contracts, not charity. But this wasn't just anyone. This was Emily, the quiet girl with the hopeful eyes who had once represented everything good about youth and possibility. Now she sat among littered wrappers in the steady stream of footsteps. Her daughters curled into her sides like frightened kittens. Without thinking, James stepped closer. Emily looked up, startled by the shadow cast over her. For a long second, they just stared at one another. Her eyes flickered with confusion, then disbelief, and finally embarrassment. She tried to look away, shielding her daughters from his view as if to hide their shame. "Emily," he asked softly, unsure if his voice would even carry above the city noise. Her shoulders stiffened. "James," she replied, her voice raspy and uncertain. His name hung in the air like a forgotten song, both strange and familiar. He crouched beside her, searching her face for the answers she clearly didn't want to give. "What happened?" he asked gently. But Emily only shook her head. "It's a long story," she muttered. James nodded slowly, not pressing, still one look at the girls, hungry, exhausted. Too young to understand the world's cruelty was enough to make his decision. He stood, offering his hand. "Come with me," he said. "Just for tonight. You don't have to stay. You and your daughters shouldn't be out here." Emily stared at his outstretched hand, torn between pride and desperation, then trembling. Slightly, she reached up and took it. Emily stood unsteadily as James helped her to her feet. "No." Her legs weak from both exhaustion and the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her shoulders. Lily and Ava clung to her sides, their small hands gripping her tattered coat with a quiet desperation that broke James's heart. He didn't know what he had expected when he stepped forward, maybe a polite refusal or a forced smile, but the raw vulnerability in Emily's eyes made everything feel so much more real. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no words came. Instead, she looked away, focusing on her daughters as she gently nudged them forward. The crowd around them barely noticed as the small group began walking toward James's parked car, a sleek black sedan that now seemed absurdly out of place compared to their fragile silhouettes. Emily kept her gaze low, avoiding the curious stares of strangers. Every step felt like a betrayal to her pride, yet she couldn't ignore the silent comfort in James's presence. He opened the car door, stepping aside to let them in, his hand resting lightly on the roof. Emily hesitated, her reflection staring back at her from the glossy finish, messy hair, hollow eyes, a shell of the woman she once was. She turned to James, her voice soft and cautious. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He paused before answering, his expression unreadable. "Because I couldn't walk away," he said simply. There was no pity in his voice, only quiet. Sincerity. Emily nodded, the weight of those words settling somewhere deep inside her. As she slid into the back seat with her daughters beside her, she wrapped her arms around them, pulling them close. The warmth of the car heater soon filled the space, melting away the bite of the winter air. James took the driver's seat, stealing a glance at them in the rearview mirror. The city blurred past the windows as they drove through Manhattan's towering skyline. Emily tried to remain composed, but her mind raced with questions she was too afraid to ask. What did James want from this? What did he see when he looked at her, now a project? A charity case? Or was it something else entirely? She watched. Lily rested her head on Ava's shoulder and felt a surge of gratitude. For now, at least, they were safe. James hadn't offered her a solution, only a night's rest, but even that felt like a miracle. As they turned down a quieter street and approached an affluent neighborhood, Emily's grip on her daughters tightened. She didn't know what lay ahead. Something told her that this moment, this single act of kindness, is about to change everything. As James guided the car through the quiet streets of an upscale Manhattan neighborhood, Emily sat silently. In the back seat, her arms wrapped protectively around Lily and Ava. The girls had drifted off to sleep, their small bodies curled up against her as if they knew that for the first time in weeks. They didn't have to brace against the cold or the noise of the street. Emily stared out the window at the world-speeding bike-lane sidewalks. Well-lit stores, doormen standing in front of polished buildings. It was like watching a different universe unfold, one she hadn't belonged to in a very long time. Heart thudded with anxiety and disbelief. This man, James Bennett, someone she hadn't seen since high school, had appeared out of nowhere and offered her a reprieve. But nothing came without a cost, much life had taught her. She didn't know what James's motivations were. Was this pity, guilt, some moral debt he felt the need to repay, or something else entirely? Up front, James glanced at her through the rearview mirror. He could see the strain on her face, the weariness carved into every line, every movement. He remembered her differently, bright, driven, the kind of girl who always looked like she had a plan. That girl was gone now, replaced by someone hardened by survival. Yet something in her eyes still reminded him of the Emily he had once watched from afar, too shy to ever speak to. Cleared his throat, unsure of how to bridge the silence. "We're almost there," he said. Emily nodded but didn't respond. She was too overwhelmed, too tired to process everything at once. When they finally pulled into the circular driveway of his townhouse, Emily's breath caught. The building stood tall and elegant, its brick facade and wrought iron balconies glowing under warm lights. A doorman stepped forward, but James waved him off. "It's okay, I've got it," he said. He came around to open the door for her, offering his hand again. She hesitated before accepting it, her fingers as cold in his. As she stepped out, her worn shoes touched the clean stone path, and the contrast felt jarring. It was as if she'd walked straight into someone else's life. Inside, the townhouse was quiet and warmly lit. The scent of wood polish and cinnamon drifted through the halls. James led them to a cozy sitting room, where a fire flickered in the hearth. Emily lowered her daughters onto a plush couch and gently covered them with a blanket James handed her. She sat down slowly, her posture stiff, as if afraid she might break something or wake from a dream. James poured 2 mugs of tea and handed one to her without a word. She accepted it with both hands, savoring the warmth. "You and the girls can stay here tonight," he said softly. "There's no pressure. Just rest." Emily stared into the fire, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." The words felt small, but they carried the weight of everything she couldn't yet say. Emily woke the next morning to the soft sound of birds chirping, the faint warmth of sunlight filtering through thick velvet curtains. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was until the scent of fresh linens and the feel of a real mattress reminded her she was far from the hard sidewalk she had grown used to. Lily and Ava were still fast asleep beside her, their small faces peaceful for once, untroubled by cold or fear. Carefully, Emily slid out of bed and padded barefoot across the thick carpet to the large window. The view overlooked a manicured garden where early autumn leaves drifted lazily to the ground. It all felt unreal, like she'd stepped into someone else's life overnight. Part of her wanted to stay lost in the comfort of this moment, but another part, the part hardened by hardship, remained guarded, wary of what came next. Downstairs, James sat at the breakfast table with a folder in front of him, flipping through documents but barely reading. His mind kept drifting to the woman and her daughters upstairs. He had meant what he said, there were no strings, no expectations, but something about Emily stirred a sense of protectiveness he couldn't shake. When she entered the room, he stood instinctively, motioning for her to sit. "Hey, there's fresh coffee and food. Help yourself," he offered. Emily gave a polite nod, her expression unreadable, and poured herself a cup. She took the seat farthest from him, still unsure of the boundaries in this unexpected arrangement. As she sipped slowly, her eyes scanned the elegant room, ornate molding, tall windows, furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The warmth of the fire from the night before had been comforting, but the daylight revealed just how foreign this world truly was. James finally broke the silence. Emily looked up, surprised by the question. "They slept well. It's better than they have in weeks," she admitted. "That's good," James replied, genuinely pleased. "I want them to feel safe here." His words hung in the air, sincere and unassuming, but Emily couldn't ignore the tight knot in her chest. She wasn't used to kindness without a catch. This is very generous of you," she said cautiously. "But I don't want to take advantage." James met her gaze calmly. You're not. You're doing what any mother would, trying to protect your kids. Let me help." His voice held no judgment, only quiet resolve. For the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to believe he might actually mean it. But trust, for her, would come slowly if at all. Later that day, Emily found herself standing hesitantly in the hallway, just outside the nursery, where Lily and Ava were giggling softly as they played with a basket of stuffed animals and wooden toys, things they had never owned before. The sight made her chest tighten with a strange blend of joy and guilt. She had fought so hard for so long, scraping together meals and shelter wherever she could. Yet here her daughters were, laughing without fear, wrapped in warmth she hadn't been able to give them. She leaned quietly against the doorframe, arms folded, the weight of everything she had endured pressing heavily on her. Despite the security of James's home, Emily couldn't shake the unease curling in her stomach. It was too much too fast, and her instincts screamed at her to be cautious. Nothing in her life had come without a cost, and the idea that someone could give without asking anything in return still felt impossible. James, who had been working from his home office, noticed her lingering figure as he stepped into the hallway. "They seem happy," he said gently, joining her at the door. Emily gave a small nod but didn't look at him. "It's more than they've had in years," she whispered, her voice nearly breaking. I'm not used to this." James placed his hands in his pockets, leaning slightly against the wall beside her. "I get it. This isn't something you planned for. I want you to know you don't owe me anything, Emily. I didn't bring you here because I expect something in return." She turned toward him finally, her eyes wary but searching. "Then why did you do it?" she asked, the vulnerability in her question exposed like a raw nerve. James paused, thoughtful. "Because I saw someone I knew once, someone strong but struggling, and I couldn't ignore it. Maybe I don't know your whole story, but I've seen enough to know you didn't end up on that sidewalk by choice." Emily exhaled, emotion rising in her throat. No one had ever looked at her that went out as a failure or a burden, but as a person. Still, it was hard to silence the voices of shame that had grown louder with every passing day of her decline. "It's hard," she admitted quietly, "to feel like I don't deserve this." James looked at her with quiet conviction.
"You
deserve safety, dignity, a second chance. Everyone does." For a moment they stood in silence, the distant sound of Lily's laughter filling the space between them. It was in that moment Emily realized that maybe, just maybe, she was no longer alone in her fight. She might not have been ready to believe in happy endings, but perhaps she could start to believe in new beginnings. Later that evening, as the sky darkened and the glow of city lights flickered through the windows of James's mansion, Emily sat alone in the guest bedroom, her fingers lightly brushing over the soft cotton sheets. It had been years since she'd felt the comfort of a real bed. Years since she'd slept without fear of being roused by sirens or the cold pavement beneath her. Her daughters, now tucked into their own beds nearby, were sleeping peacefully, their soft breaths rising and falling in rhythm, unaware of the overwhelming emotions coursing through their mother. Emily stared at the ceiling, her mind swirling with memories of everything she had endured. The eviction, the shelters, the endless nights of hunger and shame. She had fought so hard to survive that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to simply rest. And yet now that she had a safe space, she couldn't fully relax. Her heart remained guarded, wary of trusting something that felt too good to last. Downstairs, James sat at his desk in the study, staring absently at a photo of his late sister, someone he had once failed to help. It was that regret buried deeply in his past that had compelled him to stop when he saw Emily. He couldn't bear to walk away this time. He had seen that same haunted look in his sister's eyes years ago, and he still carried the weight of not doing more when it mattered. With Emily, he saw a chance to do something right. To intervene before it was too late. Back upstairs, Emily turned over in bed, her eyes settling on the shadows cast by the moonlight streaming through the curtains. Her body was exhausted, but her mind refused to rest. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't facing it alone. That thought, fragile and unfamiliar, flickered like a small flame in the darkness, a whisper of hope beginning to grow. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the city, casting golden light through the large windows of James's mansion. Emily stirred awake slowly, momentarily forgetting where she was, until the unfamiliar softness of the bed reminded her. She sat up, glancing over at Lily and Ava, still sleeping soundly under warm blankets. For a few quiet seconds, she allowed herself to take in the peace, the rare stillness of a morning not marked by struggle or fear. The smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee wafted in from the hallway, comforting contrast to the mornings she'd spent digging for coins to buy stale pastries. As she stood and stretched, Emily found a neatly folded outfit placed on a nearby chair, a simple yet elegant sweater and jeans, clearly chosen with care. A note was tucked beside it in James's handwriting. "No rush, when you're ready. Breakfast is waiting." Downstairs, James was already seated in the sunlit breakfast nook, glancing through work emails but distracted by thoughts of his guests. He had barely slept, his mind occupied by the image of Emily and her daughters huddled on that sidewalk. There was something in her eyes that had haunted him: resilience, pain, pride. He didn't see a charity case. He saw a woman fighting to protect her children at any cost. When Emily finally appeared, leading her daughters timidly into the room, James stood and smiled. "Good morning," he greeted gently. "Did you all sleep well?" Emily nodded, still unsure how to respond in this new world of kindness and comfort. As they sat down, the girls' eyes widened at the spread of fruit, eggs, and warm pancakes. For once, they didn't ask if it was okay to eat. And as Emily watched them giggle and eat freely, she realized that, for now, they were safe in That was more than she had dared to hope for. Later that afternoon, Emily found herself wandering quietly through one of the long, elegant hallways of the mansion, while Lily and Ava napped in their new beds. The grandeur of the place still felt surreal. The polished wooden floors, the antique paintings, the way every detail seemed carefully curated. It was a world far removed from the one she had known, filled with street corners, cold benches, and the constant uncertainty of survival. Her fingertips brushed against the edge of a marble-topped console table, grounding her to the present, but her mind wandered back to the life she had fled, the series of misfortunes that had spiraled. After her husband's death, the eviction, the lost jobs, and the endless line of closed doors. She had carried it all alone, fiercely protecting her daughters but losing herself in the process. As she turned the corner, she nearly bumped into James, who had just come from a meeting and looked surprised to see her there. "Exploring?" he asked, offering a soft smile. Emily nodded, her voice quiet. "It's hard to believe this is real." James gestured toward the nearby sitting room. "Do you have a moment?" She hesitated, then followed him. They sat across from each other, the late-day sunlight painting warm stripes across the room. James leaned forward slightly. "Emily, I know I brought you here out of instinct, maybe even guilt, but I meant it when I said you're not alone. Anymore." Emily looked down at her hands, still not sure she could believe that. "I'm grateful," she said softly, "but I don't want to be a burden." James shook his head. "You're not. You're someone who deserves a second chance." There was a silence then, not uncomfortable, but heavy with meaning. In that quiet, something shifted. Emily wasn't sure what came next, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely lost. That evening, as the golden glow of dusk filtered through the tall windows of the mansion, Emily sat in a small reading nook, nestled beside the fireplace. The warmth of the room contrasted sharply with the cold she had known on the streets. Lily and Ava were curled up in a corner, sketching quietly with the colored pencils James had given them earlier. Emily observed them, her heart aching and healing at once. It was strange, this mix of comfort and uncertainty. She felt like a ghost drifting between two worlds, the harsh past that clung to her like a shadow, and the uncertain promise of something better. Every now and then, she glanced toward the hallway, half expecting James to appear, though she didn't know what she would say if he did. When he finally entered, dressed more casually than she'd seen before, there was a softness in his step that mirrored the calm of the room. He walked over and gently placed a mug of tea beside her. "Chamomile," he said with a small smile. "Figured you might need something to help you relax." Emily accepted it quietly, her fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic. "You," she murmured, unsure how to express the swirl of gratitude and confusion inside her. James sat in the chair across from her, watching the girls. "They seem happy," he said. Emily followed his gaze. "They are. For now, I just hope it lasts." He turned his attention back to her. "It can, if you let it." His words lingered in the space between them. Emily knew he meant more than just shelter. He was offering stability, kindness, maybe even redemption. But trust was a slow process. She didn't know if she could ever fully let her guard down. Still, in that moment, as Ava giggled and Lily beamed up at her, something began to soften. The darkness hadn't disappeared, but a small light had begun to shine through. That night, Emily stood by the window of the guest room James had given her, staring out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Her thoughts were a storm, colliding with fragments of fear, gratitude, confusion, and a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years. The reflection in the glass startled her. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the hollow, defeated expression that had clung to her on the streets. In its place was something still fragile, but undeniably present. Her fingers rested on the sill, gripping the wood like a lifeline. Behind her, the soft breathing of Lily and Ava filled the room, the rhythm of innocence and exhaustion. James had done more than offer a roof over their heads. He'd given them a moment to breathe, to exist without fear, but that gift came with a weight Emily couldn't ignore. She had learned, often the hardest way, that nothing in life came free. People always wanted something in return, even if they didn't say it out loud. And yet, James hadn't asked for anything. Not once. No demands, no expectations, only patience. That scared her more than anything. She didn't know how to respond to kindness without suspicion. She didn't know how to accept help without feeling like a burden. As she closed the curtain and turned back to the room, Emily's gaze landed on her daughters once more. They were safe, fed, warm, and that mattered more than her fear. Maybe James was different. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to fight so hard this time. She sank onto the edge of the bed, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar feeling of being cared for. And for the first time, she let them fall. The next morning, Emily awoke to the soft light filtering through the blinds. For a moment, she almost forgot where she was. The warmth of the bed and the quiet of the room offering a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She looked over at Lily and Ava, both curled up in a deep sleep. The weight of their situation still hung heavily on her, but there was a glimmer of something different, now a sense of possibility. She had spent so long in survival mode, focused on getting through the next day, the next hour, that she hadn't had the space to think beyond that. But now there was time to breathe, to consider what could be. She stood up quietly, careful not to wake them, and moved towards the window. The view of the city was a stark contrast to her life just days ago. High rises, bustling streets, endless possibilities. It was both inspiring and overwhelming. Could this really be a new beginning for them? Escape the cycle they had been trapped in for so long. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a soft knock at the door. It was James. He had brought breakfast simple, but thoughtful. "Good morning," he said, offering a warm smile. Emily hesitated for a moment before accepting the food. She was still uncertain about how to navigate this strange new dynamic. James had been nothing but kind, but the unfamiliarity of his generosity left her feeling vulnerable. She didn't know how to trust without feeling indebted, how to accept help without worrying about what might come in return. But as she looked at him, standing there with his quiet sincerity, she realized that she didn't have to have all the answers right away. For now, they were safe. They were being cared for. That was enough. Emily sat in the dim light of the small apartment, her thoughts swirling as she tried to gather her emotions. The previous days had been a whirlwind of change, and although she wanted to feel gratitude for James' help, something inside her resisted. It wasn't easy to accept charity no matter how generous it was. As she watched Lily and Ava play quietly in the corner, her heart ached with the weight of her circumstances. They deserved more than this, a mother who could provide for them. A stable home and a future free of uncertainty. But the harsh reality was that she was struggling. It was hard enough to make ends meet on her own, let alone with 2 young children to care for. The past few years had been a constant battle, and sometimes it felt like there was no way out. Yet here she was, in a safe place for the first time in what felt like forever. Under the roof of a man who didn't owe her anything. He had no reason to help, no reason to care. But James had been different from the moment they met, his kindness and genuine concern starkly contrasting the indifference she had grown used to. Emily couldn't help but feel conflicted. She was deeply appreciative of his support, but her pride made it hard to fully embrace it. How could she accept help without feeling like she was burdening someone else? And more than that, how could she'll protect her children from the weight of this uncertainty, knowing that the safety they had now might not last? As she sat quietly, a faint knock at the door broke her reverie. It was James again, this time offering to take them out for a meal. Emily hesitated, unsure of how to respond, but looking at her children, at their faces full of hope and trust, realized that she couldn't continue shouldering this alone. For once it wasn't just about her pride, it was about them. Taking a deep breath, Emily stood up, her voice soft but steady. "All right, we'll go." It wasn't an easy decision, but it was a step toward something better as Emily, Lily, and Ava stepped out into the bustling streets of New York. The weight of their situation hung heavy in the air. The city, with its towering skyscrapers and throngs of people, felt overwhelmingly cold and indifferent, a far cry from the warmth she longed for. She glanced at her children, their innocent faces glowing with anticipation as they walked beside her, oblivious to the harsh realities of life that their mother struggled to shield them from. It was clear to Emily that life wasn't going to be kind to them without help. For years she had fought against the relentless tide of hardship, raising her children on her own, working long hours at a job that barely paid the bills and constantly worrying about what the future would hold. But no matter how hard she tried, the odds were always stacked against them. Their small apartment, once a place of dreams, had become a place of quiet despair. Yet in the midst of this, there was a sliver of hope. James Benet, the man who had appeared out of nowhere, offering assistance without expecting anything in return. Emily couldn't fully grasp why he cared so much. He was a successful businessman with his own life to lead, yet he had chosen to step into hers. And now, here she was, walking with him as he led them to a warm restaurant. She hadn't realized how much she missed the simple comfort of a meal in peace, without the gnawing anxiety of what would come next. She glanced over at James, his tall, confident frame, walking ahead with a purpose. There was kindness in his eyes, a genuine desire to help, and Emily couldn't help but feel conflicted. She didn't want to owe anyone, least of all a stranger. But the truth was, she couldn't do this on her own anymore. It was a humbling realization, and it stung more than she cared to admit. As they entered the restaurant, the welcoming warmth of the place was a stark contrast to the coldness outside. James guided them to a booth, and for the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to relax, if only a little. Her heart still carried the burden of uncertainty, but at least for tonight, her children were safe, and they were together. The future still loomed as a daunting question, but in this moment, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a better tomorrow. Emily sat quietly on the cold sidewalk of New York, her back pressed against the gritty brick wall of a nearby building. The noise of the city felt distant, muffled by the heaviness in her chest. She looked down at Lily and Ava, her two young daughters, who sat beside her, their faces tired but hopeful. Life had not been kind to them, and Emily often wondered how they could still smile with so little. Lily, with her bright brown eyes and endless curiosity, tried to keep the mood light. Talking about everything from school to their favorite cartoons, her voice an innocent reminder of the joy Emily once had. Ava, the younger of the two, held her mother's hand tightly, sensing the tension in the air, yet still clinging to her childlike faith that everything would be okay. Emily's heart ached as she thought about how much she had failed them. She had always dreamed of giving her children a better life, but now, as she sat on this unforgiving sidewalk with no money to her name and nowhere to go, it felt like she had failed them miserably. The sharp sting of shame was overwhelming. But Emily couldn't let her emotions show, not now, not in front of her girls. She had learned long ago that hiding her pain was the only way to keep them from worrying. The city moved around them, people rushing by, indifferent to their plight, focused on their own lives. Some walked past without a second glance, while others gave fleeting, sympathetic looks, but no one stopped. That was the hardest part, being invisible, even in the middle of one of the busiest cities in the world. Just when Emily was beginning to lose hope, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. She looked up, startled, and found a well-dressed man standing in front of her, his face warm with concern. James Bennett. She had seen him before, walking with purpose in the crowd, someone who seemed like he belonged to a world far removed from hers. He looked at her, and then at the girls, his gaze softening. Without saying much, he knelt down in front of them, extending a hand, offering help in a way that didn't feel like pity. Emily, unsure of how to respond, felt a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. Why was this man showing such kindness? She couldn't understand it, yet she felt a spark of something, hope, maybe, or simply the promise of a momentary reprieve from the crushing weight of her struggles. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to wonder if maybe things could change. As we come to the end of Emily's story, we can reflect on the profound lessons and values embedded within her journey. This narrative is not just about the struggles of a single mother trying to survive in the harshness of New York. It is about the resilience of the human spirit and the power of compassion. Emily's challenges may seem insurmountable, yet her unwavering love for her children and her desire to give them a better future remain her guiding lights. It is a reminder that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the strength to persevere often comes from the ones we love. The story also highlights the importance of kindness and empathy. James, a stranger in the vastness of the city, noticed Emily's plight and reached out, offering a simple gesture of help. It teaches us that even small acts of kindness can create profound changes in someone's life. In a world where it's easy to become numb to the struggles of others, this story challenges us to see beyond our own world and extend our hand to those who need it the most. From Emily's journey, we also learn about the value of hope even when everything seems bleak. Her ability to remain hopeful, despite her hardships, is a testament to the incredible power of the human heart. The story encourages us to not give up, even when life throws us into the depths of despair. It's a reminder that there is always a way forward, no matter how difficult the path may seem. Through Emily and James, we also understand that no one is truly alone. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, and that connection between people can create new possibilities. We are reminded that we have the power to change someone's world, just as someone can change ours. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, how can you make a difference in someone's life today? Whether it's offering a smile, lending a hand, or simply listening, your actions matter. Take this story as a call to action, to spread kindness, to remain hopeful, and to remember that even the smallest of gestures can change lives. If you found this story inspiring, share it with others to spread the message of hope and compassion. Let's create a ripple effect of kindness that can touch lives in ways we might never fully realize. Remember, no act of kindness is too small, and together we can build a world of understanding and care. Stay hopeful, stay compassionate, and always look out for one another.